The story of Osama bin Laden is often told as a simple tale of good versus evil, a shadowy figure driven by hatred for the West. But this version omits a crucial chapter: how the United States, in its Cold War zeal, helped create the conditions for bin Laden's rise. America didn't train bin Laden directly, but it built the perfect ecosystem for him to thrive, a crucible of secret deals and catastrophic miscalculations in Afghanistan. The US saw the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 as a chance to bleed the Red Army, launching one of the CIA's most ambitious covert operations. Billions in weapons and aid flowed to the Mujahideen, turning their struggle into a proxy war. But in empowering these fighters, America overlooked the radical ideologies taking root. The victory over the Soviets gave these militants a sense of divine destiny, and a new target, the West. America's short-sighted policy created a hothouse for militant jihadism, from which Al-Qaeda would eventually sprout. The very tools, networks, and ideology that would later be turned against the US were forged in this anti-Soviet war. The story of bin Laden's rise is a cautionary tale of unintended consequences and the dangers of short-sighted foreign policy. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 shocked the world and galvanized the US into action. President Carter and his advisors saw an opportunity: lure the Soviets into a costly quagmire. The Afghan Mujahideen became pawns in a global chess match, their struggle repurposed to bleed America's Cold War rival. The Reagan administration doubled down, making Afghanistan the centerpiece of its anti-communist crusade. Operation Cyclone, the CIA's covert program, grew into the largest since Vietnam. The US was determined to win, arming, funding, and training the Mujahideen, no matter the long-term risks. The Mujahideen were a patchwork of tribal militias and Islamist factions, united only by their hatred of the Soviets. America saw them as the perfect proxy force, motivated, ruthless, and willing to die for their cause. By providing weapons and money, the US transformed their guerrilla war into a high-tech insurgency. The ideological nature of these groups, especially their radical Islamist bent, was ignored or dismissed as a necessary evil. The consequences of these choices would echo for decades. Operation Cyclone funneled billions in arms to the Mujahideen, mostly through Pakistan's ISI. The ISI, with its own agenda, became the gatekeeper, deciding which Afghan factions received American support. Early shipments included Soviet bloc weapons to mask US involvement, but soon advanced arms like anti-tank missiles and communications gear arrived. The game changer was the Stinger missile, a shoulder-fired weapon that allowed fighters to shoot down Soviet helicopters, shifting the war's momentum. The CIA's hands-off approach let the ISI favor the most radical Islamist groups, believing they'd fight hardest and serve Pakistan's interests. The lion's share of American aid went to these extremists, strengthening the most fanatical elements of the resistance. US officials, focused on defeating the Soviets, largely ignored the long-term risks. The mountains of Afghanistan became a testing ground for jihadist warfare, with American money and weapons fueling the fire. The infrastructure, skills, and ideology built during this period would outlast the war itself. America's Cold War victory came at the cost of empowering future enemies. Into this war-torn landscape stepped Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi drawn by the call to jihad. He wasn't a CIA asset, but his rise was enabled by the American-backed conflict. Bin Laden used his fortune to support Arab volunteers, founding Maktab al-Khidmat to recruit and organize foreign fighters. While the CIA armed Afghans, bin Laden built a parallel network for the Afghan Arabs, with the ISI facilitating both efforts. The US legitimized the Afghan jihad, creating an environment where bin Laden's fundraising and recruitment thrived. American-funded training camps, run by ISI-backed groups, also trained bin Laden's recruits. The lines blurred. US support supercharged the entire jihadist ecosystem. Bin Laden gained experience in logistics, recruitment, and covert operations, skills he'd later used to build Al-Qaeda. He forged a global network of militants, united by the belief that faith and firepower could topple superpowers. The American-backed victory over the Soviets validated his worldview and provided the blueprint for his future organization. The seeds of Al-Qaeda were sown in the chaos America helped create. The CIA's Afghan operation was massive but deliberately hands-off, outsourced almost entirely to Pakistan's ISI. This gave the ISI free rein to channel US and Saudi funds to the most radical factions, while building a network of extremist madrasas. American taxpayer money and Saudi petrodollars mingled in a slush fund that fueled both war and religious indoctrination. After the Soviets withdrew in 1989, the US abruptly cut aid, leaving Afghanistan shattered and leaderless. The Mujahideen, now heavily armed, turned on each other, plunging the country into civil war. In this chaos, the Taliban, radical students from ISI-backed madrasas, rose to power, promising order through extremism. Meanwhile, tens of thousands of foreign fighters, the Afghan Arabs, had been encouraged by the US as extra pressure on the Soviets. The CIA saw their participation as a positive, never considering the long-term danger of a global network of battle-hardened jihadists. This international legion, forged in the American-backed war, became the backbone of Al-Qaeda. The blowback from America's shadow war would soon come home. When the Soviets left Afghanistan, bin Laden saw not an end but a beginning. He returned to Saudi Arabia as a war hero, with wealth, a global network, and the credibility of having defeated a superpower. Afghanistan had been his training ground. He'd learned how to build and lead a multinational terror organization. He formalized his network into Al-Qaeda, the base, aiming to harness the energy of victorious jihadists for a new global struggle. The turning point came when Iraq invaded Kuwait in 1990. Bin Laden offered his fighters to defend Saudi Arabia, but the monarchy chose US troops instead. For bin Laden, this was betrayal. Infidel soldiers on holy soil became his rallying cry. The US, once his silent partner, was now the far enemy. Bin Laden dedicated Al-Qaeda to attacking America, using the skills and networks built in the CIA-funded war. The same fighters once hailed as freedom fighters were now branded as terrorists. The war in Afghanistan had incubated a new, unpredictable enemy, one America had helped arm, train, and inspire. The long-term consequences of America's Afghan policy have been catastrophic, a textbook case of blowback. The most direct result, the September 11th attacks planned by Al-Qaeda, born from the anti-Soviet jihad. The US had created a new enemy, one that would inflict the deadliest attack on American soil. The fallout led to two costly wars, first Afghanistan, then Iraq, further destabilizing the region and spawning new jihadist groups like ISIS. For Afghans, the legacy was tragedy, civil war, Taliban rule, and endless cycles of violence. America's strategy of arming proxies and then abandoning the country left Afghanistan in ruins. Today, Afghanistan is again under hardline Islamist rule, its future uncertain. The bear trap set for the Soviets ultimately ensnared the Afghan people, and the US itself. The story of bin Laden's rise is a humbling lesson in the dangers of short-term thinking and unintended consequences. The shockwaves of these decisions are still felt today, a lasting scar on America and the world.